So this week we'll be talking about formulating ideas. If you haven't already, it's time to start thinking about ideas for your final project. There are a couple suggestions on Moodle, and we'll talk about some other potential possibilities for finding ideas. One of the biggest things in determining what you'll write on the assignment is figuring out what the assignment is. You have your grading rubric, which you should review. It's at the top of our Moodle page. One of the first things to do is kind of formulate your question. So you want to start with a broad question or topic and then narrow it down to something more specific. Pre-research, kind of that early stage, should be broad. That's the best strategy for learning new material. And then as you kind of figure out within that topic what you want to focus on, then you can narrow your subject. You also want to start identifying your sources. Now, in terms of pre-research or trying to figure out what your topic is, you could look at textbooks. So you might go through and look at textbooks from your previous classes. Your intro textbook is a good kind of overview of many different disciplines in psychology. Or you might think about which psych classes you've taken that you really enjoyed. You can look at those textbooks, your notes to get ideas. For pre-research, as you're just trying to figure out what you want to cover, you might also use the internet or other popular sources to kind of figure out what you want to cover. But then for your actual paper, you'll want to stick to scholarly sources. And we'll talk a little bit more later on about what exactly that means. Some suggestions if you have no idea what you want to write. Review textbooks and class notes. Like I said, Introduction to Psychology and other classes that interest you. You can also just Google ideas. So this is an okay starting point. The topic of this paper is incredibly broad. I want you to have something that you're interested in and also something that there's enough literature on it that you can write about. So generally, Googling is not recommended as a strategy for psychology research, but as kind of a starting point, figuring out what you're going to write about, that would be okay. But again, remember that these sources that you're finding now are to give you ideas. You need to actually go find the academic literature and make sure that there's evidence to support it. Okay, so this should give you kind of a sense of the process of research. And so it's not just you do it and then you're done. You start out with pre-research, which is where you're at. And this is to help you choose a paper topic and give you kind of general information about potential topics. So you've got a couple activities this week that are kind of brainstorming activities. You might skim through popular or scholarly sources. And your goal here is to kind of slowly narrow your focus. Then we'll get to preliminary research, where you're trying to get more information about your topic. You're starting to look a lot more at scholarly sources because you're trying to figure out which questions have been answered, which have not. If you pick a topic that there's no academic research on, that's not a good topic for this paper. You want to find something that people have done research on because your job is to summarize the research. And so you're going to kind of choose your questions, look at those scholarly sources. You're probably going to be mostly skimming still during the preliminary research, but you might find a couple papers that are really relevant and read those more closely. And then eventually you'll get to the focused research, where the goal is really to get in-depth knowledge about the topic that you've chosen. And so you're really developing your thesis statement and adding to it, finding sources relevant to specific perspectives. And you're really reading sources closely and taking notes on the idea and keeping very careful track of the citations, because by the time you get to the focused research, this is the meat of your paper. This is what you'll actually use. And so you're kind of continuously changing the way you do research to adjust to the focus of adjust the focus and your thesis statement. This isn't necessarily linear. So you might do your pre-research, get a topic, do your preliminary research and come up with your thesis statement, and then realize, oh no, I don't actually have any evidence to support it. As you get into your focused research, you realize there's not actually any evidence on the specific thing you wanted to look at. So you might need to change your topic a little bit and go back and do some more preliminary research. And that's okay, that's part of the process. So just be aware, if you're realizing getting into things that you have no evidence for the topic that you've chosen, then go ahead and think about changing it, and we'll have multiple meetings to kind of help you identify if you have enough on your topic. Okay, so one of the big things that I hope you take out of this class is the idea of a thesis statement. So a lot of times what I see in students writing is they get a subject. So the subject is what your paper is about. And you say, I've got a topic, I've got a subject, I want to expand the idea. Now, the goal of this paper and many other papers is to make that subject into an argument. So your thesis needs to be an argument. The subject is the general topic, but you need to make some kind of argument about that topic. Okay, so that's the point you're going to argue. Now, it doesn't have to be earth-shattering. It can be something like, child abuse has negative effects on kids. Okay, so it doesn't, your topic would be child abuse and your thesis would be child abuse has negative effects on kids. That's not a new thesis, that's not earth-shattering, but it is the argument that you're going to make. And in your paper, you will systematically try to provide evidence that it does, in fact, have negative effects. So the thesis is the argument, and your paper absolutely needs to have an argument that you are making. So the thesis is the argumentative edge. It needs to make a point. Now, again, throughout this process, throughout the semester, keep in mind that your thesis might change depending on your evidence, and that's okay. So I'm going to ask you to provide your thesis earlier in the semester. I'm going to ask you to update it a couple of times throughout the semester, because I know that if you're doing it right, if you're reading the research, you may have to adjust it. Remember that the thesis is not what your paper is about. So this paper is about sleep deprivation and torture. That's not something that's going to draw the reader in. That's the topic of the paper. So instead, your thesis statement needs to make an argument. So you might say something like, even without physical assault, sleep deprivation constitutes torture when it's used as an enhanced interrogation technique. So now I'm not saying I'm going to write a paper about sleep deprivation and torture. I'm saying I am going to make the argument that sleep deprivation can in fact be used as torture. And so making your subject into a thesis is going to require a little bit of work, and it's going to require you to narrow down exactly what you want to talk about. And so this is a process. Okay, so I want you to pause this and take a second and think about these 4 different topics and write a thesis statement about each topic. Okay, so I don't have a key for this one, but I mean, it can be anything that makes an argument. So if your paper is about the appearance of our campus, the thesis statement could be like, our campus needs an improvement in its appearance. Or our campus is lovely. The appearance of our campus has positive impacts on students' perception and students' happiness. Anything that has to do with it, but that is clearly making an argument. So for each of those, you should be able to come up with a statement that makes some kind of argument. Okay. So here's a common kind of, a couple of common problems that I see. So again, what I want you to do is pause this and take each of these statements that I've seen students list things that are similar as their thesis statement, but there are problems with all of these. And so take a second and pause this and see if you can rewrite these into a strong thesis statement. Okay, and for these, just so you can see, I did give you a couple of examples of ways you might do this. So the first one, why are citizens of the US so divided on gun control, and how do they feel gun control laws will affect their lives? Great questions, no clear argument there, right? So you might convert it into something like US citizens are more likely to be against gun control if they place a higher value on individual freedoms. So we have kind of clear emphasis or very specific expectations, not expectations, but very specific expectations of what to find. Number 2, the campus would look different with more beautification projects. The bigger problem with this is that it's just really vague. Different how? Good, bad, in between? I don't know. But you want your thesis to be as specific as possible. So rephrasing it to something like beautification projects would improve the appearance of our campus, make it very clear that you expect the difference to be in a positive direction. So these are getting your subject into a thesis is going to be very important. So make sure you take the time to practice these and look at the kinds of things you're thinking as a thesis statement to make sure that you are making an argument.